Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. Sorry we missed you last week. Life gets in the way and it's the off season, but we're back with some at least a little exciting NBA off-season news. We're going to talk a little more Kaepernick, and then of course you're going to get to listen to me ramble about advanced analytics because that's why you come in and week out. At least I believe that's the case. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is our voice of God, our own producer, Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Say hey, Brian.
What's up, Dre? We've got some pretty big NBA news going on today. A sad piece of NBA news as well, but yeah, we're getting close to the season. It's pretty awesome. Training camps are going to be starting, I think, in the next few weeks. So yeah, we're getting somewhere.
All right. So anyway, let's for those of you regular listeners of the show that don't know, we come up with a little script. Brian does a ton of work, gets a ton of links, and then I just go through it, Ron Burgundy style. So let's get started. NBA news is our first segment. And, the very first one is you have a story up here that KG may be retiring because it looks like the Timberwolves are thinking of possibly just buying him out, and, he may move on. So couple of thoughts on this. I don't necessarily think that's bad for the T-Wolves' long-term success, given that, they do have some talented bigs. KG last season, I'll put this out there this way, only played 500 minutes. Remarkable that he's still playing average at that age. I mean, let's just point out that, Kobe Bryant, who I do view as very impressive for lasting as long as he did in the NBA, was really downright horrible his last couple of seasons. And all the credit in the world, if you're a downright horrible player and, close to your 40s in the NBA, that's still impressive. Playing sports is difficult. But, KG still playing, putting up any semblance of average minutes for the Wolves last season is impressive, but really not doing anybody any favors when you've got, Gorgie Jang, Karl Anthony Towns. Forget if they did anything, they actually bolstered. They got some more bigs. I think we liked the offseason, right? They got, I think, Jordan Hill. One other, was it Cole Aldrich? Am I crazy?
You might be crazy, but I don't know about Cole Aldrich. I'm not sure. We can check that out.
We can check the, if back in the day, we used to have something called the BSG drinking game, which I may update at some point this season. Maybe you can do one. This is a rare occurrence, one you might have to do a double shot for. Brian dropping the ball. That's one of the first times I've ever thrown a question out to you, Brian, and you drop the ball in it. So double shot if you're playing the game, which you don't have the rules for. So there you go. Calvin ball in effect. But, I think they bolstered. They got some more bigs this offseason. They don't really need Kevin Garnett. So I don't have a problem with this. I think the one note you put is, it would be a pretty star-studded Hall of Fame. I would put that up there with the Shaq, Yao, AI Hall of Fame if you get Kobe, Tim Duncan, KG, which, all are definitely first balloters.
Yeah, for sure. And we've got the career comparisons up right now for Garnett, Duncan, and Bryant. And Duncan and Garnett are just two of the best of all time in their positions. In the turnover era, anyway, starting in the late 70s. We don't know how good Wilt was, unfortunately.
We've had this discussion on the show a lot before, Brian, where, sorry to do this to you, 50s and 60s with, 8-team NBA with players that could barely shoot 50% true shooting. Turnover era is just much stronger. Any player that's a top player in the turnover era NBA, I would take on my team above almost anybody. I think Oscar Robertson and Wilt Chamberlain are two of the only players that I might even consider on my, if we were picking dodgeball style in their prime team to compete against the turnover era players.
Yeah, for sure. There's just a lot less people playing basketball back then, especially around the world too. So yeah, it's there are exceptions like Wilt, but yeah. No, I mean, yeah, these are the guys that had modern training. They compete against the best in the world, and they were the best of the best. So yeah, I mean, if Garnett does happen to retire, it's being reported by Mark Stein, pretty reliable on these kind of things. So, yeah, wow, what a great career. We got to see the whole thing, and not always on great teams, but at times he was, and he was a great player.
Well, he's one of my favorite examples for this because I get really incensed when we talk about players, and you hear there are a lot of popular memes. This might be a listicle at some point, Brian.
Hollow
That's something.
stats. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say this upcoming season, I may make like a top 10 list. I'll probably engage you and Patrick on some suggestions, but like a listicle of like 10 of my most hated annoying kind of memes or tropes or whatever you want to call it. So the hollow stats, the looters in a riot, the good player on a bad team, the only good because he's on a good team, these kind of things. Like KG to me proved where it's like this is an amazing player that can do everything. And he was great on Minnesota with no support on one of the worst teams in the league. He was great on Boston with one of the best support staffs in the league. The existence of Kevin Garnett is really useful when people try and defend players that we think are good but overrated like Kobe. Players like Kevin Garnett are really useful because we go, all of your arguments about Kobe would be correct if players like Kevin Garnett didn't exist.
Yeah, that's right. And and like Duncan, he's a player that did everything. He played defense. He scored efficiently. The only thing the two of them didn't really do is shoot threes, which they weren't asked to do back then. I bet they could do it if they wanted, if they had worked on it. But yeah,
Who
just
knows?
not. I mean, this is going to be an epic Hall of Fame class. I have to say, so there is one with I think Jordan and John Stockton and someone else, maybe even Magic Johnson. That was I think 2008 or 2009. That was a ridiculous class, but this one will be up there with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, interesting note just on that comparison you had up is that I am kind of shocked to find out that, Kobe Bryant, 32.9 3-point shooting efficiency over his career. That's, it's an interesting one, actually. So a common thing that comes up, Brian, slight tangent here, is, what if Shaq could shoot free throws? A real important question is what if Kobe could shoot threes? An average wing from 1997 to 2016. I don't know if you know about this, just plugging one of our tools again. If you go to the Boxscore Geeks tools tab, which will actually be, if you're looking for the URL, boxscoregeeks.com/players compare. If you put career into the drop down there, and as mentioned, we're looking at Kobe, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett for those of you following along at home who want to do this later. We'll include a link in the show notes. The fascinating point to me is when I say average wing, I mean what an average wing player over the, weighted over the span of career for Kobe. One thing I don't quite do is I don't weight minutes. Kobe played more minutes earlier than later. But if you just weight those seasons, the average wing shot, 36%, and Kobe only shot 32.9% from three. So if Kobe Bryant taking as many threes as he did, shot at the same clip as an average wing, he might actually be at that elite level that we bash him regularly for not being at.
Yeah, that's right. And one funny thing I'm noticing looking at this is I was saying Kevin Garnett wasn't much of a 3-point shooter. He was 27.5, which was not very good. Probably shouldn't be shooting threes, but that's not that much lower than Kobe, It's only
it's hugely more. But I mean,
it is
an interesting point about the 3-point shot. Wow, we've gotten way off the rails. I'll finish up this 3-point shot tangent, Brian, and get us back. But a lot of the shots that Kevin Garnett took were long twos, and I've heard this. This is anecdotal, and it's impossible to know. But what I would hear people saying is Kevin Garnett had a really sweet 3-point shot. He just hated taking it, and one of the biggest problems in the NBA is actually talented players that don't always do the most intelligent things. And it's hard to know if that's team scheme, the player themselves. The stat that this really applies to is shooting efficiency. So the question is, could Kevin Garnett have taken 2 steps back on a lot of his long twos and made threes at a good clip? We don't know. That's one of our arguments that we've had forever, and we might talk more later on the show possibly. But we can only tell you what happened, and when you start predicting stuff, it gets difficult for a variety of reasons. All we know is how well these players did shoot in the circumstances they had. And the reason I'll actually bash Kobe a little on the 3-point is you can't really argue that he didn't have, at least during over 50% of his career, a good support staff that should have been conducive to him shooting better 3-point shots.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when you're playing with Shaq, or Gasol even for that matter, yeah, you should be able to get some open threes. So,
well, I mean, a fun game for these 3 players, by the way, right, is okay. You take Kobe. I'm going to say only on Los Angeles. That's a little easier for Kobe. I say only on San Antonio. That's easy for for Duncan and only on Minnesota for KG. It's like start listing off great players they played next to, and you got Shaq, Powell, Lamar Odom, Robert Ory. Actually, Horace Grant is a funny one just because he actually did play quite well when he was there. Let's see, there've got to be other good names that I'm dropping. You can start doing that. It's much easier for Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, David Robinson, Kawhi. You look at KG and like how many great players can you remember that played next to him on the Timberwolves that we would consider great? And
Yeah,
I'm kind of drawing a blank.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to deal with some technical issues here, but no, I'm right with you on this. This will be a big 3 Hall of Fame class, but yeah, one of them isn't quite like the other. I mean, Kobe is a great player. We've said that before. It's just you have to look at what level of great he is. He's not as great as those two, not even close. Sorry,
Well,
LA fans.
that gets really rough. I'm going to try and do this really quick, but if you look at the 19, I believe 85 draft, am I crazy? The one with it's either 84 or 85. I always mess it up.
The one with Patrick
It
Ewing
is.
and all those
Oh
guys.
no, Hakeem Olajuwon. Wow,
Oh,
Patrick
okay.
Ewing right after Hakeem.
Yeah.
Okay, so you look at the 1985 or 84 draft. Sorry, so 1985 season, 1984 draft. If you look at that draft, I mean, there were some good players in that draft, if I recall. Let's see if I can just get one. Like Otis Thorpe, Sam Perkins, both really, pretty good players their career. The problem is you're just drafted in a draft with Jordan, Barkley, Stockton, Hakeem. So you're always going to be kind of second fiddle to that. So it's the same with Kobe. He's great. Just there are some other names that he's going to, because he came into the league next to KG, right? Were they the same draft? Or am I crazy?
Kobe and KG.
Or actually, like
It was close, if so, because they were the first.
Kobe and
They were the last high school players that weren't drafted highly, if that makes sense. They're like, these guys are kind of a risk. And yeah, Kobe went ninth or whatever, and KG, what did he go, like third or fifth?
He went fifth. He went fifth.
Fifth,
He was
yeah.
fifth.
So I think, then a few years after that, of course, the high school players all started going number one. Then the ban went in and they had to go to college. So, yeah, they were kind of the beginning of that high school trend as well. You can count guys like Moses Malone earlier, but from that era anyway, they were the beginning of the trend.
KG was one year earlier. Kobe Bryant came in
Okay.
97.
Yeah.
But all I was going to say is, just when you're tied next to certain players, when your careers are kind of close, it gets kind of rough, right? That's one reason Sam Bowie is screwed. Is I don't really, it's Bowie or Bowie, sorry, but I don't really
Bowie,
consider
yeah.
him I don't consider him a draft bust at all. I don't even consider him a failure as an NBA player, seeing as even through injuries he had, I think, like a decade-long career. It's just because you're sandwiched between Hakeem and
Jordan
and Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was some fun NBA history, which is one of our, favorite little things we like to talk in between, topical subjects. Let's get on to the next. Good job. That's my answer is good move. Makes complete sense. I have absolutely no problem with this move. You had some back and forth discussions about this, but the simple arguments I'll put forward before I let you talk is you go to boxscoregeeks.com. As always, before the season, I want to get you all ready about what you need to do. If you go to boxscoregeeks.com, click on the players tab, and then sort by wins produced, you will notice that Giannis, I believe, shows up 15th. Right below Jimmy Butler, right above Rudy Gobert.
What are we sorting by here? Total wins?
Yeah, total wins.
Sure.
And I mean, what I'll note is, obviously, those two players, Gobert and Jimmy Butler, I would argue would probably end up higher than him if they'd played full minutes. But, he's a top 15 player in the NBA in wins produced. The margin I always kind of look at is 10 wins. If a player gets 10 wins, I got zero complaints giving them the max, especially when we consider that, one thing we've looked at before, Brian, and I think I put in a couple posts, I think is something like wins per million or whatever, when I was first grading the offseason, looking like Hassan Whiteside, et cetera. But just an important thing to consider is that on its own isn't necessarily a fantastic metric because you're going to have players that are rookies, and rookies are just woefully underpaid. Giannis this next season, not in his contract that's coming up, right? He'll be making that amount. But if I'm not mistaken, I think he's got one more year on his rookie deal, which give me 1 second to tell you what that is. This next season he's making $3 million a year. So whoop-de-doo, right? Even next season he's not going to hurt you in terms of cap hit. So You're always going to have rookies that are underpaid. If you're a smart team, you're able to target, what conventional wisdom calls role players, what we call underrated stars, players like Kenneth Fareed, players like Robin Lopez, et cetera. These players that are really great, but they're not ever going to garner a max contract. So if you're an NBA team paying market value, which, I think is probably right about what Giannis is getting, um, paying I think about 2 million per win is more than reasonable, provided the rest of your roster is constructed well. And the other thing is I think he's only 21 years old. He is one of the most versatile players in the NBA. I think he may be the tallest player to play point guard at an elite level since Magic Johnson. There is no reason to be upset with this move. Fantastic. I say fantastic, even though this is a falling off a log move. The Bucks drafted him, so that means they have his restricted free agency rights. Um, it is one of those where if a player hits this level of performance, there's no reason not to just lock him up now if you think his free market value is going to be that anyway. And, a kind of warning from NBA history, since we've been talking a little NBA history and, of course, brought up Kobe and Tim Duncan, a warning from NBA history was Shaquille O'Neal back in the day. Shaquille O'Neal did exist in this brief window in the NBA history where the CBA did not give teams restricted free agency on rookie contracts. That's why he left. But it was the Orlando Magic kind of trying to, skirt around just giving him a max deal immediately, that led to him leaving. So with Giannis, if you're like, hey, do you want to re-sign with us? He's like, oh, absolutely. Just give me a max deal. It's one of those where you just go, oh, cool. You're saying yes. I'm saying yes. We're not going to get into staring contests. If you recall, Kawhi with the Spurs actually had that where he said, I'm going to opt out of my deal and I'm going to look at free agency and we can come back to it. Obviously with Kawhi, if he said, yeah, I'll sign a max, you just sign him to the max and you don't worry about it. So I call it kind of a falling off the logs move, but right move, and it's good for Bucks fans. I'm not really a Bucks fan myself. I'll have to make the playoffs a couple seasons before I actually transition full time. But that said, good move on their part.
Yeah, so that was my first impression too when I saw this. Is yeah, great job, Bucks. Good job locking up your young guy because. So first of all, I think from the eye test perspective, like we love Giannis so much, right? He's big, athletic, does everything, does a lot of stuff we like. So, yeah, we're kind of biased towards loving him as a player, and that he's Greek and all this other stuff too. That's kind of interesting too. So anyway, but I don't know. I looked at it a little bit more, and he is very young. He's only been in the league 3 seasons. He so now you compared him to the top 15 players in the league, and let's bring this up again here.
He is. I mean, he's like I said, total wins, and that is it's a hard thing to quantify as much as I would like, but there is something to be said for a player that's on the court 80 games as opposed to a player that only on that per minute is great. Shaq's an example of this, a player that is fantastic in 60 games, but you're gonna have to account for not being around not being around for 20 games. There is something to be said for that. So
yeah, well, so I guess I'd make the argument that just based on pure stats last year per minute production, he is kind of a tier below all those other guys. His now, just one thing, 80 one JP 48 is just quite a bit lower.
Well, I gave you this. There is a link, and the player I used is James Harden, just as a comparison, because
I want to get to that.
One thing that we do, and I do think is important, and a lot of stats don't, even though we might discuss kind of like the positionless basketball thing, and actually there's a good nylon calculus piece on it we might talk in a second. But the point being that, we acknowledge that point guards have different responsibilities than, wings who have different responsibilities than bigs. And I may annoy everybody again, but there's at least an initial nylon calculus news that may make me refactor the ratings a little more and do like, point guard, wing, stretch, center, but who knows? But just the big point being that different players have different responsibilities. So the one thing the Wins Produced has always done is we compare guards to guards, bigs to bigs, etc. The current iteration on the Boxscore Geeks, we compare point guards to point guards. Wings, that would be players in the box score that are usually designated as shooting guard or small forward, to wings. Put those in one bucket. And then bigs, these are players usually designated as power forward center to power forward centers. And then for tweener players, players that, uh, LeBron James is a good example who plays sometime at wing, sometime at big. We split the difference and we basically say, if they played 60% of their time as a big and 40% as a wing, we say compare take an average wing for 40%, take an average big for 60%, add that together, and then subtract that off of their total production, which is the ADJP number that you'll see on the Boxscore Geeks on the players tab. So we've always kind of done that. Now, the annoying part about Giannis is that he is listed last season as a point guard. And we have an automated metric that, we agree in some cases we may actually have to manually edit. And that may be something next season I actually throw out to the audience and say, there are definitely players in NBA history. Dirk Nowitzki and how am I dropping his name? Sean Marion on the Mavericks together, an example where I may actually, instead of just considering Dirk Nowitzki the big and Sean Marion the wing, I may want to cut it down the middle. But we have an automated thing that kind of promotes people. So you'll notice that Giannis, we say he played a majority of his time as a point guard because he's a 1.4 position and, a little less time as a shooting guard. The reality I may have to go through is his designation to point guard changed about mid-season. If you look at the average ADJ for a wing player versus a point guard, it is lower for a wing than a point guard. And this makes sense. The reason this happens, by the way, this is a lot like pitchers in baseball, quarterbacks in football. Point guards get the ball. And at least in the modern NBA, there is not a team in the NBA, I think, that really doesn't have a designated ball handler. We can get into arguments and disputes about who that player is, but that is a very common strategy. Giannis wasn't a point guard all of last season. So I think that if I actually went through game by game and designated him as a wing, probably a small forward for I think his first 50 games, and then a point guard as his last 30 and reran everything, I do actually think that he would hit that 0.2 barrier you're talking about.
So what if? Okay, that's really interesting. A lot of thoughts on that. So first of all, you're just talking about last season. Season before 2014-15, he played small forward all season, and then his rookie season before that, he played power forward all season. So he's played 3 different positions theoretically in his first 3 seasons. So is turning him into a point guard and giving him a lot of money for that, is that even the right thing to do? Because his 5.9 assists for 48, that's pretty good for any position other than point guard, where it's pretty bad.
But so this is where I actually want. That's why I want to.
That's why you want to do the breakdown.
I have the game by game numbers for last season and performance, and I actually do need to look over last season and see when there was that jump from wing to point guard. Because let's go. This is another useful link for people if you're following along. If you go to Basketball Reference, you can just type in a player's name. So I'm going to type in Giannis. And then if you click on the season, so once you get to Giannis, I don't know where Brian is on that. Apologies, we're not actually synced up here. But if you go to their per game, you can actually click on the season. And I believe that should actually take you to a game-by-game log.
Yeah, we can bring that up. Let me share screens for you again.
If you look at his assists, like game 62, this is Basketball Reference, not Boxscore Geeks, Brian.
Oh, well.
So you have game by game here, but I'm actually in Basketball Reference because Basketball Reference does you could even scroll down Milwaukee against Minnesota of all teams on the 4th of March. By the way, I don't know if you just saw me do that. I don't know where my camera cutoff is. I actually did have to count out that 3 was March on my fingers. That's embarrassing.
He's got a ton of assists in March and April.
On the 4th of March, he is easily over. I'm eyeballing it. I gotta guess that he'll be over 10 10 assists per game, and actually close to 10 rebounds a game too during that stretch. So but then if you look earlier in the season, if you look basically October, November. And even start of December, his assists are really low. So he's one of these annoying players where I haven't actually had a player like this in NBA history before, where they basically did a huge jump. This is kind of Babe Ruth-like in baseball, where he jumped from being a pitcher to an outfielder, and that's such a huge discrepancy from what we're used to. I mean, like I said, you linked a cool nylon calculus piece to me about looking at position versatility on players using 82 games, which uses play-by-play data to examine, where players played position season by season. And I definitely think there's something To that, it's not as cut and dried as that, but the point being, we haven't had that many players in NBA history that can basically jump from being the smallest position to one of the bigger positions. Magic Johnson in his rookie season would be an example. So this is one of the only seasons I may actually have to jump through and say this player shifted positions dramatically mid-season, and I have to update the numbers accordingly.
So I got two hot takes on that right away. Let me run these by you. So one way to do it could be display it like you do for a player that gets traded. You can say, here's his 2015, 2016 stats playing forward, and then here's his 2015, 2016 stats playing point guard, and have those be like two different rows. That could be an interesting way to do it.
Probably not.
Okay.
But I mean, the thing is, we're software developers. We talk a lot of tech on this. The thing is, when there is one player in NBA history that I have to deal with this, or two. I mean, Magic Johnson's the other example where playoffs in 1980s. And actually, here's an annoying factoid, Brian. Something I do want to get in the database eventually is I don't know if they go game by game, but they do at least do series by series. Basketball Reference does have finals data, even for seasons we don't have the box score. So we can get like wins produced numbers for that finals, and that'll be an interesting one where I have to figure out, Magic Johnson is a point guard for 80% of his minutes in the 1980s finals and a center for 20% of his minutes. But no, I mean, sorry, that was a lot of stuff at you, people. If you're fans of the Boxscore Geeks regularly, hopefully that flowed. If you're not, and this is like your first time, apologies. That's a lot to take in. Key point, Giannis, according to our numbers, to me, easy pickup, especially with the age curve. You'd expect some progression. He should hit that number. Last season, at least according to some kind of rule of thumb numbers we have, which is 0.2 wins per 48. That means twice as good as an average NBA player. He looks a little below that, but I argue he's probably above that because our numbers kind of lie and consider him a point guard for more of last season because of some automated behind the scenes stuff. And normally we don't have an issue with that, but there are a few players, Giannis and probably Dirk Nowitzki. And like I said, this upcoming season, I may bug some of you for, crowdsourcing help on that. That's all I got there, Brian. Yeah.
So I'll close with just supporting two of your big points that I really liked here. The first is, so what are my kind of red flags or complaints here maybe about this deal? It's really just sample size, right? That we haven't seen enough of this good Giannis yet maybe to justify max deal. But I liked you brought up the James Harden point because James Harden was similar in that, he started out pretty good and he just got better and better and better, and then he got his big deal and he just kept getting better. And that's kind of how Giannis has been. Like he just keeps improving. The other one is
9.2 wins his second season as that. 11.1. The only I want to stress this. The only thing that will happen to his numbers if I do the examination we just discussed is they will go up. There is no possibility of them going down. I want that 100% clear.
And even the end of the season, he's even better there. And then I love the second point about Milwaukee too, is that maybe this isn't a so how good of a max deal is this? It's not a Kevin Durant level max deal. You're not getting an all-time great player.
Freaking Warriors fans.
But it's a lot better than, say, Bradley Beal or Harrison Barnes, right? Where you're just putting a max deal into a player that's, probably not that good. So it's probably closer to Durant than any of those other ones, but maybe not quite there. But when you're Milwaukee and like you said, you have a player that's willing to take that max from you, that likes being there, you got to do it, right? Even if there is a small chance because of the sample size, you got to pull the trigger. And yeah, I'm with you. I think this will probably be a really good deal.
I mean, the only kind of gamble they could make this upcoming season, which I'm not a fan of, is to say maybe Giannis gets injured and a la Steph Curry. So Steph Curry got injured, I think his second season in the NBA. And so when it came time for him to do the exact same thing that Giannis is doing here, they offered Steph Curry a long deal, 4 years, but they basically said, I think around $11 million a season. And he said yes, because he went, I don't want to risk if I'm injured. I don't want to risk me having zero market availability. So the Milwaukee Bucks' only hope would be that he has something terrible happen to him this offseason and they get a bargain on him and he comes back healthy. That's not a gamble I want to take.
No.
Basically, we've talked this before. A player I really like is Kenneth Faried. In a perfect world, Kenneth Faried is a max contract player in the NBA. But the reality is the way the current market in the NBA works is if you pay max contract for Kenneth Reed, which the Nuggets did not do, if you pay max contract value for him, you have overspent because no one else would pay that. So the thing about Giannis, though, is a 6'11". I looked this up. He has a 7'3" wingspan. Thank you very much for True Hoop for having that data. I've been grabbing a lot of wingspan data from Draft Express. They didn't happen to have it up. So thank you, True Hoop, because they had an article that listed his wingspan. He has a 7'3" wingspan. He scores a lot of points. He rebounds like mad. He's a triple double machine. This is a player, a good example, by the way, just for comparison, is Russell Westbrook. You look at kind of a comparable player on the open market and what happened with them. Max deal. Giannis is going to get a max deal in the NBA. So don't blink. I think we've had these discussions before. We call it the Patrick Picasso principle. It's funny. I don't even call this Picasso. We might even want to downgrade it. The point is, when you see a 10 plus wins produced player at the right price, just sign him and don't get into a fight if there is any risk of you losing them. And the Bucks did that. So good work.
It's like when Picasso is young, right when he's starting, to get famous. You can be a Picasso hipster and buy on Giannis now. That's how I'd say it is.
There is no way to look at this move and not say it wasn't. If there's the fourth down bot for football. If there is the NBA Geek free agent bot, we would say we agree with this move. There is no problem with this move. The NBA Geek NBA free agency bot says this is the right move.
Nice move, Bucks.
All right, so moving on. This is just like we kind of like talking economics sometime on the show. You mentioned that the NBA revenue is set to surpass $8 billion this upcoming season, according to the Score. It was only $5.2 billion. Wow, really that much of a jump? That's impressive. I didn't realize this. It was only $5.2 billion in 2015. So that's, over a $3 billion jump in 2 years, even adjusted for inflation. There's no way inflation moved that fast. You did note that Major League Baseball is $9.5 billion, but we can also note Major League Baseball goes twice as long. It's a 160-game season. And you've mentioned this before. We've had lots of talks on the show about demographics. The NBA seems to be really popular among younger fans. Baseball is an older person's game. And baseball, Bill James has even said this, baseball seems to have an aversion to trying to pick up younger fans. So this is just fantastic news going forward for basketball. We can't predict the future. The future is really hard. But in terms of the major sports, baseball, hockey, basketball, football, I think basketball is the most primed to be the sport of the future. Football's got the concussion issues. Baseball's got, a problem with getting young fans. Hockey has always been, the ugly stepchild in this family of sports. So and hockey hasn't really done anything for me to make me think that it would ever have a jump. So yeah, good job on basketball.
Yeah, and to put it in perspective with the NFL, going back to that 2015 number again, NFL was at 13 billion. So when the NBA hits 8 million, it'll still probably be half of the NFL. But yeah, you're right. As people get older and older, are young people going to keep playing football in the numbers they are now? I mean, for the immediate future, of course, but in 10 to 20 years, who knows? But yeah, NBA fans, they're just going to start getting older and having more money. Baseball fans are going to have less. So yeah, it's I don't want to pick on baseball or anything, but NBA is doing pretty good business-wise lately. And I just always want to point this out is when it comes time for the owners to lock the players out coming up soon, they're just even more full of it than usual. They are making a ton of money.
Yeah. No complaints there.
So there's a bunch of random players that we
let's go through them quick. We'll do like a lightning round. So Lance Stevenson to the Pelicans. No complaints with this. I'll point out we were a little sad at his progression because he looked kind of like a star player in Indiana. One thing I will note about Indiana, I don't know what's in the water, but players do seem to overperform expectations for us in Indiana. So maybe they got a steroids crew or something. But he has played average the last two seasons, or not the last two seasons. He played average with the Clippers and average with Memphis. He had to fight for minutes. Big reason he got minutes last season in Memphis was there were just so many injuries. But he looked fine. He looked like an NBA caliber player above average. Do you happen to know, I'll go to Spotrac really quick, but do you happen to know the details of his contract?
No, but I think it's really small. I think it's
it can't be anything. I mean,
yeah. So good opportunistic deal for them, I think.
Let's say I'm curious. Lance Stevenson. We've kind of talked this before. I did an article about, what I kind of look for in, um, you know, in off-season acquisitions. If you recall, I don't know if you've got it up in front of you, Brian, but I wrote it earlier this year, right at the start of the off-season, about just I'd look at age, performance, et cetera, et cetera. So Lance Stevenson, he's only 25 last season, so he'll be 26. That's in his prime. According to this, he is only signed for a 1-year deal for 1.2 million. So
The
cost is
veteran
cheap.
minimum, yeah.
His performance last season was about average, right? An average player. So 1 million for an average player, great. And he's had a high ceiling. When we look at his young performance in Indiana, he looked like a star player. Obviously, has a star player ceiling. The Boxscore Geeks free agent bot says, yeah, this is a fantastic move. You can never really get mad at signing an average player with star ceiling to a $1 million a year deal. I think Jordan Hill, if I recall, when we were talking the Timberwolves with KG earlier, I do believe that Jordan Hill exacts, a little more expensive. He was 4 million a season, but yeah, same boat. When you sign a average player with star ceiling to a essentially min contract or close to min contract, you've made the right move.
Yeah, and Jordan Hill hasn't even been as up and down as Stevenson. He's just been solid. So yeah, those are both. I mean, yeah, anytime you have someone that's a solid player, bring him in. Okay, so let's just go to Jordan Farmar and the Kings. They already have Darren Collison and Ty Lawson, but they hired Dave Yeager as coach. They're going to bring in Jordan Farmar. This just doesn't matter, I don't think. The Kings aren't going anywhere. I don't think this one matters.
So Jordan Farmar, let's see, last season was a slightly below average player and only play. This was the Memphis, having to play the kitchen sink. He didn't even play that many minutes. He is years away from playing over 1,000 minutes. He was at his best average. So his ceiling as an average player, his kind of floor is a below average to weak player based on his last 2 seasons of play. I believe he's pretty old, right? Is he in his 30s?
I would guess he is. Yeah, he's been around a while.
So I'm looking this up right now. Jordan Farmar, he entered the NBA in 2007, so he's turning 30 this season. Um, I mean, it's not terrible on the Brian. If people who've been listening this offseason, thank you all for continuing
Yeah.
listening with the NBA news. The Brian Lightyear to Brian Crying Jordan scale.
I'll
So
give it one
one to
crying
four,
Jordan.
1 to 4 Crying Jordans to a bad deal. 1 to 4 light years for a good deal. We don't have a meh rating, unfortunately, and we kind of argued back and forth, and I actually said I don't want that. So I agree with you, Brian. One Crying Jordan, but we've had lots of discussions about things that make you upset with deals. So, for instance, if you're the Wizards, you should be really, really upset with the Brad Beal deal because it locks them in to a bad contract with a player that's going to get lots of minutes. That's going to hamper that team's progression. Well, I don't like the Farmar deal, and it is a one crying Jordan. It's not really an impact to that team, right? It doesn't keep the Kings from getting better. So I don't really have a problem
No,
with
the
it.
only problem with it is when you've already got two point guards on the team that are probably better than him. Well, Ty Lawson, who knows, but theoretically, and then I'm blanking on who the other one is. The guy from UCLA, Collison. That's who Darren Collison, who's pretty good. So he's not going to be a factor on the team really. Why not give that roster spot to someone in their early 20s, that can develop? That's all. So yeah, it's not a big deal for them really. Let's see. Otherwise, what do we have here? We've got we can talk Mitch McGarry in a little minute. Let's see the rest of
Okay,
the.
the one you have is this is just fun. We talk in practice. Tyronn Lue
Oh
says that
yeah.
AI could join the coaching staff. Let's just get some easy licks in. Why would you want a coach on the coaching staff that's going to encourage no practice? Why would you want AI on the staff? He was in love with the mid range too. It would be funny. I wouldn't hate seeing Allen Iverson on the bench. We, in the grand scheme of things, don't think it matters. And what we discussed last season a lot of David Blatt getting fired. The way the Cavaliers are currently constructed, they are a bunch of. I don't want this to come out mean, Brian. There's no way it's not going to. They are a bunch of marquee prima donna players, right? We
Oh,
argued when
interesting.
David Blatt. Well, we argued when David Blatt was fired, or I argued at least when David Blatt was fired, he was hired to a rebuilding squad, right? You have these young players. Kyrie Irving's the only real bona fide, and I don't even consider him a star, but he's the only bona fide star on the team. You have these young draft picks, you have these young players, and they wanted a coach to come in and crack the whip and develop them, and that's not a problem. But then when they end up trading Wiggins for what's his name, Kevin Love, when they get LeBron James back, when they pick up J.R. Smith, now you've got these seasoned veterans that are star players or whatever that kind of have, egos. And you don't really need a player to develop these players. You need a player to juggle egos. And that's why Tyronn Lue was a better pick than David Blatt. So, if that's the type of team you have, having Allen Iverson, even if he's just a player that can kind of keep the peace, I don't really think it matters. I think it's just a nice move, a friend doing for a friend in the NBA, but just a funny one, how to get the practice thing. I have no opinion on Mitch McGary getting 10 more games suspension. I do think getting suspended for marijuana in the NBA is freaking stupid. That said, do you have anything else to say on it, Brian? So just filling it in, Mitch McGary suspended for failing a likely marijuana drug test. And he's going to get 10 more games added to his suspension because he's refusing to get tested sooner. I have no opinion on this other than it's stupid. I'm from Colorado. Colorado legalized weed. When they ever get a team back, Seattle legalized weed. Why is weed a big deal?
Yeah, the thing I always want to talk about with this is just the physical pounding that these guys go through. And, put situations like Brett Favre, who's taking, 15 Vicodin at once. And that, I guess that the leagues think that's a better alternative than, let's say a gentler analgesic drug like marijuana. So, who knows what Mitch McGary is going through? I don't really. It's just, it's dumb that the league decides to draw the line there. A little bit antiquated.
All right.
So I hope he does the best. He's a player that did well in college, and hopefully he'll come through and do well. And so we've got some more like kind of random real GM stuff.
And I'm going to push this forward. So you had some nylon calculus stats.
Okay, let's do it.
And I don't want to talk too much about it, although I will talk a little at the end. The position versatility score is definitely interesting to me, in that it's trying. We discussed this a little with Giannis, where you're looking at players that can play multiple positions, and there is this big popular meme of small ball and positionless basketball. I will give it what I always call the Brian magnitude test. I find a lot of modern stats kind of find stuff to look at and measure. And the one thing they kind of fail to do is say, how much does this actually matter? How much does this help or improve? So saying a player has a versatile position index, does that really matter? Does it matter if I have a center that just plays center versus a center that could play down to small forward? How much does it matter? We've talked Draymond Green. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying the next thing I'd want to see is how much does it matter to have a versatile set of positions. And that really gets into a weird argument because that gets into team construction. Because having a versatile position player like Draymond Green, when you don't really have a lot of healthy bigs like the Warriors did last season, that matters a lot more than if you've got a team. One of my favorite examples is always the 2008 Boston Celtics. The 2008 Boston Celtics basically got a obvious player at every position. They had Rajon Rondo at point guard. They had Ray Allen at shooting guard. They had Paul Pierce at small forward. They had Kevin Durant at power forward. And, this was back when he was actually good. They had Kendrick Perkins at center. They essentially had a obvious position-by-position player for the top five, and then they had a few good role players off the bench. I mean, that team was basically constructed in a very paint-by-numbers what you want an NBA position-by-position to be. So the problem with some of these metrics is they tend to matter in the context of the team the player is on, and that always gets interesting. Plus-minus tracking, I'm just going to move on from that for now. And
the only thing I'll note on that is they're doing something with Sports VU, which we're always interested in. So, this article itself is probably not great, but at least it's heading in the right direction.
All right. And then they've got a nice long article on Rajon Rondo's assists. I'll be honest, I haven't read it. I'm actually fascinated because assists are one of the more interesting stats, and I've seen some interesting notes on Rajon Rondo and the Kings last year. So I want to read over before I comment any more on that. All right, let's move on to our second topic, which is Colin Kaepernick. Patrick actually came out of retirement, so to speak, for the offseason to talk about one of the major issues that kind of Kaepernick has shown, and I won't lie, this is a very Facebook-y topic to me where I see some of my friends make this argument, and it kind of pains me. Patrick titled it, "Is it okay to protest? How about now?" and noted that a common argument about Colin Kaepernick is, he's protesting at an inconvenient time, or essentially the tone policing argument, right? It's impolite of him to protest now. A really common kind of meme I have seen around gun violence is everybody after there is a shooting in this country says it's really inappropriate to talk about gun deaths in this country right now. Right after the victim is dead. Really, you should show some respect and decorum and wait. And people have pointed out, if you do that, there is never time to wait to talk about gun deaths, because we have tons of gun deaths in this country. And so that's a general, Patrick points out as kind of a red flag to note whenever anybody brings up that argument, is that protests and progress by their very nature are inconvenient. It's a change. And if
That's
you
the
always
goal.
say, if you always say, hey, you really need to not protest around September 11th, or you really need to not protest because we're just at a game. You really need to think about, whatever. You're basically just always putting them on the back burner. And it's a neat, sounds almost flippant to say it this way, but it's a very neat trick and usually used by privileged people. And obviously we think it's bullshit. And Patrick's noticed, if you're a privileged person that isn't really impacted by this, like, I don't give a damn if you protest before a football game. It's kind of up to you to lend your voice to that, because otherwise people like Kaepernick will get drowned out by people saying, sit down and shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the reasons why. So first of all, Patrick did write this article, so check it out. Check out all of his links. And another reason why I wanted to talk about this is, okay, so here's some of the articles that I linked on this week for the show. There's just more and more people coming out supporting him in the sports world and other areas, including Steve Kerr of the Warriors. It all ties back to the Warriors. Steve Kerr supported Kaepernick today. Nancy Armour of USA Today Sports wrote an article called "Let's Hear from Colin Kaepernick Critics Now," saying people like Jerry Rice, who criticized Kaepernick originally, for non-NBA NFL fans, former 49er great Jerry Rice. Everyone knows who Jerry Rice is, right? Do I really have to say that?
I hope you know the catch, right? Wasn't that him? Wasn't he the catch with Montana?
He was not the catch. He was not.
Who was the catch with Montana?
The catch was
Sorry,
Dwight Clark. But
all right. Well, clearly I'm not a 49ers fan.
But Jerry Rice, great player, right? So he's come around. There is an article in The Economist, not even an American publication, titled "Why Colin Kaepernick's Silent Protest is Catching On." So I guess what I'm asking is, has he turned the tide? It was looking like he was going to get blackballed by the league initially, and now
he still might. Let's be clear. He still
might.
We have no idea the long-term impact, and the issue, especially with him on the bench, is, I actually a former person that it's still fun to follow, the Miami Heat index, Mosey Platt. We talked a lot. I always kind of got annoyed with some circular logic you would have on NBA players like James Harden, like Kevin Love. He'd say, how can they be that great if they're coming off the bench? And I'd go, that's
right.
not their fault. That's
he said
the
that about
coach's
Hassan
problem.
Whiteside, didn't he? Hassan Whiteside.
I don't know. But the point being, the problem with Kaepernick in a couple seasons is if he hasn't gotten his way back to a starting role, it is really, really easy for NFL teams to say, we don't really need Kaepernick in a couple seasons and argue that it's not it's not his protest related, it's football related. And that gets really, really easy. So we still don't know the long-term impact on him from this.
Yeah.
I do find that everybody is misinformed on jerseys. Even if everybody goes out and buys Kaepernick jerseys, this actually falls into another fun issue that I've seen with the NFL. I'll link to Cracked post on it. When the NFL does breast cancer awareness and releases the pink jerseys, such a small fraction of that actually goes to the cause that it doesn't really matter. So people think, I'm spending $50 on a jersey. I've got to be helping breast cancer. I just gave them $50. Nah, you gave them a quarter. And then you gave the NFL, $46 because it cost them nothing to make that jersey. Same with Kaepernick. The winners from people buying Kaepernick's jersey to support him is the NFL, which is kind of a sad end of this conclusion, right? The NFL getting mad at Kaepernick for sitting, NFL executives saying, we're not going to hire Kaepernick. This is worse than killing someone. That's not hyperbole. There was apparently a behind-the-scenes exec that compared Kaepernick to another player that killed someone in terms of offensiveness.
Ray Caruth.
The real winner of this is the NFL. The NFL gets all that revenue from the jersey revenues, and they split it up equally amongst the teams. One last shout out I want to give to both, occasional co-host of the show, Andrew Sutton, and then he put this link in 2 weeks ago, so apologies, but it's called Absurdist Words is the Twitter handle. I put it on the script,
Ooh.
Brian. He has a really long, kind of Twitter rant about Kaepernick, and he actually asks a really important question, which he says, why the hell, if the national anthem is this patriotic big thing, what does that have to do with playing sports? Sports is just so innocuous. It's a fun thing, and um, I don't know if I can find this quickly. If you look up national anthem origin, there was an ESPN piece actually in 2011. Actually, I just found it, Brian. I'll put it on the script. But they noted that essentially the national anthem being played at games came about first before it became the official national anthem of the United States. This was during World War II, I believe, in the 20s. And second was essentially during a lull during a baseball game during the war. So it's really funny that the national anthem at games is just kind of a tradition that started kind of by chance. And now we've got everybody saying he's disrespecting the flag, disrespecting the country. I'll link the Jonathan Weiler podcast that he's got. I still don't know the title that they're going to give it, but he and co-host whose name I am forgetting. So let me see if I can get that in front of me because I don't want to snub his co-host. Jonathan Weiler and Matt Andrews had a podcast about Kaepernick. They pointed out how odd it is that apparently there is ownership over the flag by both the military, which is odd. And then why is it at games? Like why are we showing respect? The argument we're getting from people is it's disrespecting the military not to stand for the national anthem at games. Two very important questions. Why is the flag only the property of the military, which I argue it shouldn't be, and they argued as well? And two, why is it so closely tied with this media event? We don't play the national anthem before movies. We don't play it before television shows. There are important events that we don't play the national anthem in front of. So it's a really odd place to get people where we need to acknowledge that this is a tradition related to sports, but it's not as if it is some set upon by high that has always been the case.
Yeah, that's true. And
You.
we were talking about this with Patrick too. Is that yeah, there was competing national anthems. There was one related to Columbia, the old maternal symbol before we had the Statue of Liberty. There was other patriotic songs too, and yeah, the national anthem just kind of ended up winning. And we've also talked about the racist history of the national anthem and Francis Scott Key who wrote it. So yeah, I mean, it's just it basically it started in with 9/11, right? When 9/11 happened, we decided we're gonna sing "God Bless America" during the seventh inning of every baseball game, and yeah, and then we're just gonna really get patriotic. And apparently free speech is not patriotic these days, though. But but you touched on the Jonathan Weiler podcast, and it's called "Head in the Game." I did listen to it as well, and one of the kind of interesting things the most interesting thing to me anyway, that they talked about is how the United States has used sports historically to kind of push its own political agendas. They talked about situations where, they would send like the Harlem Globetrotters around the world. They would send Jesse Owens around the world touring, and they would show, hey, look at how great the racial harmony is in the United States. We're not that bad actually. We have these great athletes that retreat well. So if it were to turn out that the athletes weren't being treated as well, then it's kind of a pokes holes in that story that the leagues and various municipalities have been trying to push forward all these years. So there's incentive, I guess, for the leagues to want to have this unified front.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk that podcast forever, and I don't want to get down that. So basically, go listen to that podcast. We linked it on the show notes last week. Kaepernick is staying in the news, which I see that as good and bad for a variety of reasons. The bad just being there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and even in sports, it is so. This has kind of been the year. Sorry for another tangent, Brian. It's not like I wasn't kind of aware of this, but especially the internet kind of changed media a little in that media was already attention getting. I think the 24-hour news cycle that kind of happened in the 80s shifted media to being, we really need to get people's attention. And the internet exacerbated it. And this year has kind of been the year where I've just gone, the media is not interested in presenting news, even news organizations. The media is not interested in kind of presenting the facts to you. It is interested in getting your attention. The most recent example, the week we're recording this show, Donald Trump released a meme about Skittles, comparing them to refugees, which is basically a racist trope that's been thrown around in a lot of racist news groups essentially for years. And doesn't even make any sense because he shows like a little bowl of Skittles and says, if three of these Skittles could kill you, would you take a handful? And people pointed out, if you're making the comparison to refugees, you really have to do billions, and that bowl would be gigantic.
A 10.9 billion Skittle bowl, Marshawn Lynch's dream, I guess.
Oh yeah. But then what I was going to say about that is, same time that story came out, news has been coming out about the Donald Trump Foundation. That's basically Donald Trump has been, using money that goes to charity to just fund things for himself. There were stories in recent weeks like
Settle
he funded
lawsuits.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. It gets worse because there were stories like he was using it to pay like for a giant picture of himself for his meals and stuff. And then it's gotten even worse where apparently he's been using it to like settle lawsuits. So it's like this is absolutely horrible news. And of course, of those two stories, when you're talking about a presidential candidate, what do you think matters more? Racist presidential candidate post a racist meme. If you don't think Donald Trump is racist, I got nothing to say to you. I'm sorry. It's very obvious he's racist. But racist presidential candidate post racist meme versus presidential candidate with, large money ties has been, committing fraud with his foundation. And note, when there was some suspicion of impropriety with the Clinton Foundation, the media was all over that, and now they're silent on Donald Trump. It's kind of like this is the year where I'm just going, I think honestly the irony is both sides of the fence can agree with this because we've all seen it where our side, quote unquote, is getting unfairly bashed, right? There are Republicans that are, why are you bashing this person more than you should? There are Democrats that can say the same. It's very obvious that the media just picks stories they think will get page views as opposed to news that they should report, and that's kind of depressing.
It is, and I think specifically with Kaepernick, so I think most of the people.
And sorry, yeah, to tie it back to Kaepernick, I think there are lots of other stories in sports media that might deserve more attention. The Derrick Rose sexual assault case is going on right now and is getting, it's getting coverage, but it's getting such a blip compared to the Kaepernick thing. And while I do have opinions on the Kaepernick flag thing, obviously my opinion is like I think most people should just do a shoulder shrug and say he can do what he wants. And I think Derrick Rose should be getting much more press, and it's not necessarily that way.
No, I think people watch the NFL because they don't want to talk about politics or care about it, right? They probably go out of their way to avoid any political talk. And then they turn a football game and they're like, God damn it, why do I have to watch this politics when I want to watch football? I think that's probably a big part of it, is people just trying to bury their head in the ground. So anyway, for better or worse, yeah, that's kind of where it's headed. But to finish up on this Kaepernick, I just had a couple more things.
Go for it.
Yeah, so one of the bad things we had today was Mike Gundy, the football coach of Oklahoma State, said that protesting players should watch the movie A Few Good Men, and I guess learn some discipline from Jack Nicholson's character. So yeah, just check out that news story. It's kind of funny that he got the meaning of the movie completely opposite wrong. Colin Kaepernick received death threats today also, and he's taking it in stride, and he says if something happens to him, it's proved his point. So that's another thing going on with it. You're not anyone until you got death threats, I guess. And of course, the Onion.
Messed up.
The Onion. Well, yeah, it is.
That is a messed up sentiment to have, and I really hope that changes at some point.
I hope so too. The Onion got this right though. Their article is titled, "I wish NFL players could find a way to protest without starting a national dialogue." So, I guess that kind of ties into our not wanting to deal with politics thoughts. So anyway, yeah,
that sounds sarcastic. Was that Onion you said the last one?
Yes.
That's so beautiful. It's like, it's like I would really like you to do something important without doing something. The metaphor I've had in my head about a lot of this is working out.
Interesting.
Actually, another long time. I'm cutting our very last topic, Brian. We'll go right to shoutouts after this because that last topic is kind of evergreen, and I can talk on another show.
Oh, good.
But what I was going to say is an interesting thing I found out in a book club when I was talking David and Goliath. a point that Malcolm Gladwell brings up in David and Goliath is that sometimes there are disadvantages that are actually advantages, or things that may seem disadvantageous but may actually be advantageous. And the rough part is the disadvantage may be suffering. He brings up dyslexia. People with dyslexia certainly have a bunch of disadvantage, certainly have to put up with a bunch of hardships, but being able to weather through that hardness may actually be able to make them capable of doing great things. The very, very classic, your grandmother might tell you this line of anecdotal wisdom is, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I have found a lot of people are very averse to that notion, right? They're going, we don't want people to suffer. If we want to talk about one of those stupid millennial tropes about kids nowadays, we want everybody to get a trophy. We don't want them to suffer. I'm not necessarily agreeing on it, but what I will say is a lot of times things that improve you, like working out, things like studying, things like getting better in things, require discomfort. That's just something we know. And so the same is very much true of politics and policy and protesting. If it's easy, if it's super duper easy to improve a problem, it maybe wasn't that big of a problem, right? Ideal world, you make a very light, simple change and it has a huge impact. That's the best case scenario. But for many fixes in the world, it's going to have to cause some discomfort. And so people getting shocked that, hey, fixing racism in the United States, maybe it's not going to be easy. Like that bugs me when people are like, why don't they, the Patrick post that he put up today is perfect. When people are like, we want them to protest, but we want it to be convenient. It's like, this is a major problem. It's not going to be convenient to fix. So that one thing kind of bugs me. And like I said, it was a good point that came up in David and Goliath. And just a general problem I have is when people want things to have major fixes, but also be convenient, I think it's somewhat delusional in a lot of cases.
There you go. There you go. So, do we want to do a tease for the analytics segment we're going to skip?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple op-eds in me about some analytics stuff, pretty much related to the discussions with Dave Barry talking dredge. Some of the I want to get this out there. I have a lot of respect for a lot of the people at Nylon Calculus. I think they do some good work. But I have constantly talked about my kind of general, is malaise the right word here, Brian? We pre-show people, we were realizing that I used the wrong vocab word and Brian caught me on it.
Malaise
So
could be the right word. You're just kind of
malaise is
glazed
right.
over. You're just kind of in a stupor.
Yeah. My general malaise about the state of analytics, and I have a couple of think pieces to just write in that, me rambling, which, you've got tons of already on the show. That's why I'm skipping it. So we may put that in a later show. It's kind of an evergreen topic. So that's why we're cutting it out of this week's show.
Awesome.
All right, Brian, we can go straight to shoutouts. I actually have one, and you've got a couple, so I'll let you go first, and then I'll follow you up, and that'll be our show.
Oh, yeah. So we talked about Marshawn Lynch earlier and his love of candy. He actually has a line of chocolate bars out now, Beast Mode chocolate bars that he's making out of my town of Emeryville. So they look pretty tasty in the pictures. They look kind of expensive, though. So we'll see how that goes. I'm optimistic.
You can buy a 3-pack chocolate bar set for only $12. I mean, that is $4 a bar, but hey, maybe it's worth it.
They look really good, but we'll see.
Probably not worth it. But anyway.
Probably not worth it. We already talked about the Jonathan Weiler's new podcast, Head in the Game. Really interesting, historical, history, economics, and sports, I think, is the three things they're going to talk about.
We've had Jonathan Weiler a few times on the show, and maybe I'll include those links. When I linked him out on the Monday link post, Brian, I intentionally went out of my way not to link him on our show because I wanted people to go to him. But what I will say is him and Matt Andrews have incredible chemistry. I mean, He's been on this show a few times, and, obviously I love to talk. And so having a guest, it's always a hard bit of back and forth. My cat wants to make some comments. It's always hard to get some back and forth about talking to a guest and letting them talk and letting you talk. But him and Matt Andrews have this synergy where they both just cut into each other, like not cut in a bad way. I'm saying they're able to jump in and talk to each other back and forth really well. So I'm amazed at their chemistry on that show. So if you like Jonathan Weiler on our show but want to see him with, I'm not going to insult us as teammates, but I'll say better synergy. Matt Andrews, I believe that's the right name, is a fantastic.
Chemistry matters, Dre. They've got a good plus minus, on off rating. God. No, but I'll just say that so the thing I love most about college professors is, there's a lot of smart people out there in the world. people can ramble on about stuff and say a lot about it, but college professors just have this way of saying stuff in the most brilliant way in the most
The
smallest
good
number
ones,
of
the
words
good ones.
possible.
I would
Yeah,
include Dave Barry in this category. If you
yeah,
find a college professor, which means they're probably very knowledgeable on the subject, and they're a good talker, which both Jonathan Weiler and Dave Barry are,
yeah.
and Matt, am I getting that right? Because I'm really starting to worry that I said the
I don't
wrong
have it
thing.
written down. Let's look it up real fast.
Okay, it is Matt Andrews. Thank goodness. Phew.
Okay, good job.
Matt Andrews as well appears to be the case. When you get a college professor with good, we're talking wrestling, because I did do a CM Punk link on that link
Oh,
post
we
as well,
both have
Brian.
our wrestling shirts on today. Good
Oh
job
wow!
there.
So what do you got? I've been watching you.
I've got my Broseph Joe Brody shirt on. He's one of our local celebrities in the Oakland promotion Hood Slam. So yeah, he does
Yeah,
a great job.
you are way more. You can definitely have the elitism on me, right? Because you've got the like. I watch the indie shows. I watch real wrestling. I'm not like those losers that only care about what's in the WWE, which I'll include myself. Um, but yeah, anyway, I was just gonna say, yeah, their mic skills are amazing. If we're talking wrestling, so they got good mic skills.
Yes, yeah.
All right, I think that's all of your.
I've got one more shout out. I came across a good old linear regression webcomic
I've got to retort to this as soon as
from
you say
about
it, though.
5 years ago. Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, one of my favorite web comics, and this man says, "Why is that woman scowling at me? Do I know her?" And then the caption is, "If she loves you more and more every day by linear regression, she hated you before you met." So you don't agree, though, Dre.
Are you ready for this? Are you ready for a geek response? If you
I'm
look at
ready.
any linear regression, there is an intercept term. If you think of a graph starts at 0. So in linear regression, there actually is a term that places where the initial thing started. So that is not necessarily true. Depending on the intercept, the linear regression may have started positive. So, actually, I'll counter you with another funny joke. There's an XKCD on integration.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
where it's the women suck at women suck at math and then whatever, and it's plus C or whatever. And basically the thing is, yeah, in integration you add a constant to the end, and so same kind of idea there. Anyway, sorry. So it's called it's XKCD 385. It's called Wow, You Suck at Math, and the reason is that the person is forgetting the constant at the end. All right. So my shout outs, I obviously already mentioned Andrew Sutton just for bringing it to my attention. And then, of course, the actual Twitter follower. Sorry, I just missed this. Can you refresh my memory? I put it on the script, but I have to scroll up, Brian.
Are you talking about absurdist words?
Absurdist words.
Yeah, let's bring him up.
Fantastic again. Twitter follow, and then thank you for Andrew Sutton to bring it to my attention. That's a shout out, especially on the Kaepernick note. The other one I want to bring up is actually to Russell Westbrook, who just did a fantastic tweet, kind of about racism. I want to make sure I get the name right. It depresses me so much, Brian, that it is virtually impossible to keep up to date with police shootings or even just shootings in the United States. Like I already have problem remembering names, but it is Terrence Crutcher, I believe. I hope I'm saying that right.
That's right.
But I really wish, like you'll notice sometimes I forget hashtags and forget names. And if you're not from the U.S., the reason is it's so freaking common, and that's just depressing. For those of you that don't know, Terrence Crutcher is someone who he had a car breakdown, and police that were responding not to the breakdown to another call stopped. He had his hands up. And then the police tasered him and shot him, and then he died on the way to the hospital. And then there is so much video of it that I think there are 3 or 4 angles that we get. We even hear behind the scenes audio of them saying he looks like a bad dude, which is really weird. And that's what Russell Westbrook talks about. He put it on Instagram, where he says, the dispatcher, someone on the radio, is talking about Terrence Crutcher and saying he looks like a bad dude. This is a guy next to a broken down car with his hands over his head. And Russell Westbrook points out that he is a tall black person, and that if just someone assumes that you're a bad dude because you're tall and black in the country, even for the most privileged, which Russell Westbrook is, it's terrifying. And so Russell Westbrook, I'm not going to read it. I'll encourage you to read the whole thing because it's fantastic. Points out, it's him using a celebrity to say, if this guy isn't safe, I have to be worried too. And he ends it with, he starts it with enough is enough. So fantastic post from Russell Westbrook. Really glad he does that. A final kind of follow-up on that because it relates to Kaepernick. Whenever an athlete does something, and we've had this discussion on the show, Brian, it is easy to be skeptical. It is easy to be cynical. It's easy to say, why didn't they do more? I kind of agree with that. At the same token, when a rich person uses their resources to do anything, even if it's just raise awareness, if your initial response is to be mad at them, and I'm not saying you can't kind of follow that down the line and start questioning how much they're really helping, but I'm saying if your initial response is to say, why didn't they do more? The real first thing should be thank you for them doing anything at all because so many of these people don't get their voices heard, period.
Good shout out.
All right. That's all I got, Brian. Good news is we're getting closer and closer to the NBA season, so hopefully in the upcoming shows we'll actually have stuff. Patrick, by the way, is actually going to Vegas this year, so we may actually do the Vegas portfolio again. The last couple of seasons we haven't done that. I'm not going to do any prediction, but I will gladly write about the prediction game for Patrick. Anyway, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. You can find our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote. It helps us out. We go live every week, keeping you in the loop. It should likely be Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, assuming no technical difficulties. I have a baby class on Tuesday, so that makes life a lot easier. It will probably be Wednesdays for the foreseeable future. So Wednesdays, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. If you missed the live show, you can follow the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. You can follow myself, Nerd Numbers, Brian Foster, Boxscore Brian, or our normal co-host Patrick Mitten, NBA Geek on Twitter, if you just want to be 100% in the loop for when we're going live. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week.